Hey, look at all these happy faces. Love technology, does wonders for us. Howdy, David. G'day, Matthew, Alex, Cameron, and Frank.
Good morning, good afternoon, How are we all?
Frank, did you get my email? I can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Yep, now I'm unmuted.
Ah.
Yeah, I did get your email. I haven't had a chance to have a look at it
That's
yet.
all right.
I'll have a look at it tonight.
I sent you the wrong link first time round. I sent it twice, so you'll get the right one the second time.
I'll try both. One
Yeah.
will work.
No worries. Very good. Alrighty. We're not going to wait for anyone. Stuff it. We're going to get going. Teams for life. So obviously you guys have got some interest in building teams, or you wouldn't be here unless you had nothing else to do. So welcome to the call. What I might get you to do is, while we're sort of getting going, we've got a chat box. And if you can just type in there who you are and what you do, that sort of gives everyone else a sense of who's on the call. Also gives me a sense of who we're talking to. It's a pretty small group, so I'm happy if you want to leave your mics open and you want to interrupt me and talk as we go through. This is a really important topic, because when we talk about building businesses, probably the hidden secret to being successful in business is finding and keeping good people. And we talk about it a lot, and a lot of people don't think about it until the time that they need people, and I'm going to suggest that's not the best time. So I've got a few things I want to talk about today, but fundamentally, we're going to be talking about how to find good people, how to keep good people, and how to make sure they're productive. Now, as I go through today's conversation, I'm happy to answer questions. So if you've got any along the way, let me know. And I'm going to be drawing, so I'm going to use my super new boot technology to put my screen up like that, because it's easier to draw on this than it is to just stand up and do whiteboard. So I just want to talk about, I suppose, the journey of a business owner and really why it is so important to be recruiting. Because some of us are terrified by recruiting. They think it's something that they've tried before, they've failed, or they don't want to do because it's too risky. But let's have a look at the journey of a business owner. Okay, so generally a business owner starts off by deciding, one day they have a bit of what Gerber used to call the entrepreneurial seizure, and say stuff that I'm not working for anyone else. I want to go and start my own business. And they go out and they sort of get an ABN number. They get excited. They put a shingle on the front door and they go in search of, the inaugural customer. And usually for any one of those of you who remember when you started your business, your customer was basically anyone who was willing to talk to you and had a few dollars to spend. And we weren't too discerning about, how profitable they would be as a client. We weren't too discerning about how good they'd be as a client. We just said, come on board. And sometimes, we talk about anyone with a pulse and a wallet. Sometimes they had no wallet, and we'd serve them for free. And the whole idea was to get our business idea off the ground. And this was awesome, right? Because serving those people proved that we actually could contribute value. And then what would happen is these people would pay us, but they wouldn't pay us directly. They'd pay the business. Okay, and by not paying us directly and paying the business, it meant that the tax department could stick his hand in your bank account, the landlord could stick his hand in your bank account, and anyone else who you had to pay for a service would take their share, leaving you what was called leftover. And this is how the cycle of business begins, right? Now, if you're good at what you do, you will get busy. And when I talk to people in business, the most common thing I hear is how busy everyone is. But busy and not being profitable is dangerous. Busy and not really knowing what you should be doing next because you're in overwhelm is dangerous. But the biggest issue I see in this model that we're talking about is risk. Because we go into business, and we build a business so that we can have our lifestyle choices. We go into business so that we can have our, make as much money as we choose. And reality is, when I meet the majority of people in business that I do meet, they're tied. They're tied to the business. They're working harder than they ever have before, and they're probably taking less money than is legal. So we end up in this dilemma, and we work harder thinking the more customers we get, right, the more customers we get going down this way, the more money comes in, the more money comes in, the more money comes to us. Now, that's sort of true, but sooner or later you run out of capacity. And when we run out of capacity, one of two things happens. We either slow right down, we get sort of bogged, or we start realizing that we need some help. So we go out to the marketplace and we say, you know what, we need help. I'm going to find some of these guys, right? Team members. And the objective when we employ people is simple, right? These people should work for me. They should do the work of the business so I can go ahead and keep being entrepreneurial and keep growing my business. And they should serve these clients. Now, the dilemma that occurs normally is when we recruit, okay? And for most people, if I ask the question, when's the best time to recruit, I get a combination of when I'm busy, because when I'm making money and I can afford to pay wages is the best time to recruit. And other times what I get is the comment of I should be recruiting when I'm quiet so I can find the right people and I can bring them on board. Now I'll suggest that your recruitment strategy should not be connected in any way, shape or form to how busy you are in business. I'll just say that again. You should not be recruiting related to how busy you are. The right way to be recruiting is when the right person knocks on your front door. And I'll give you a classic example of this. I don't care how busy you are or how quiet you are. If someone walks into your business and says, I want to work for you, Cameron, I'm willing to work for free, right? Just give me a chance to prove myself. I almost guarantee that as long as that person doesn't sound too loopy, that you're going to give them a seat in the business to have a go, right? So I'm going to ask you to reframe how you think about recruiting, because recruiting should be happening from the minute you decide you want to start your business, right? You should have the door open. The only thing that I'm suggesting is be very clear on what you're looking for, right? Don't recruit anybody, right? Make sure that you know what you're looking for. And I'm going to talk about how you do that in today's session.
David, you made a very similar point on one of the last seminars I had the opportunity to speak. And that comment has sat with me since. And you didn't expand on that. You didn't need to.
Yeah.
You made a very valid point. But it stuck home, and I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Excellent. So look, I probably made another comment. I'm not sure if I did, but an old mentor of mine used to say to me, in business, you get the people you deserve, which is a real sort of slap in the face comment, right? Because what it tells me is that if you're not finding good people, don't look in the market, look in the mirror and start recognizing that the problem isn't out there. The problem is inside, in between your two ears. Now, the beauty of doing that is once you recognize that it's your problem, you can fix it, right? As long as you think it's other people's problems, you've got no control. Saying I can't find good people is an excuse, okay? Because good people exist, but they're generally not looking for jobs, right? Because if they're good, why would they be looking, okay? So how do we attract good people versus how do we hope that a good person is going to fall out of the sky and land in my business? Because I think that's a bit of an unrealistic expectation that people have. So I'm going to talk through that in detail today because you've got the framework, right? The reasoning. Now let's talk about how we do this. So there's going to be 6 steps that I'm going to talk through today, and each one of these I'm going to sort of expand on to a degree so that you guys understand what you need to do to prepare your business to attract high caliber team members. Because when they start coming to you looking for work, you know that you've got the formula right. And it all starts with this one here. Hope you can see. Yeah, you can see that. That's looking good. Strong leadership, okay? So when I talk about strong leadership in business, what I mean by this is pretty simply, you went into business for all the right reasons. You had an entrepreneurial moment and you decided I can do it better than my boss or my competitor, or I've got a great idea I want to take to market. Or you might be one of those unlucky ones that basically got retrenched and got a package and said, I can't get a job anymore, so I've got to start a business. A lot of different reasons why people go in. But if you want people to work for you, the question you need to answer is, why would they work for you in the first place? I'll tell you an old story. It's an interesting one. I had a friend who was, this is many years ago, and he was looking for a wife. Yeah. And he was desperate and dateless. And we sat down one night and he said, David, I just don't understand it. I just can't find the right woman. And I said, well, I'm a coach and I'm going to help you here. So the first thing you need to do to find the right woman is you need to tell me exactly what you're looking for in writing, right? So I said, please give me a list of all the attributes and traits of the perfect wife. So he comes back with your typical blokey description, right? She's got to be tall, she's got to have long hair, she's got to have this body, da-da-da-da-da. And it was an interesting description, right? It could have been any one of the supermodels on the planet that he described. And it was fine. I said, at least you've defined who you're looking for. And then I asked the second question and he nearly fell off his chair. I said, so fantastic, now that we know what we're looking for, right? Because there's a thing in our brain called the reticular activating system, and it's a goal-setting mechanism. And once you know what you're looking for, there's chances are you're going to see it, right? Everyone's experienced this. If you bought a new car, you know what I mean. You buy a car, might be like a red Corolla. You're driving down the street in a red Corolla, and all of a sudden there's a heap of other red Corollas on the road, right? Now, the only thing that actually changed was your focus. The number of cars never changed. So going back to my friend, I won't mention his name because it's a true story. he wrote down all these attributes of the perfect wife. And I said, okay, now that we've defined this perfect wife, all of a sudden you're going to see all of these women that appear out of nowhere that fit the category. I said, but there's one question that you need to answer. If that woman was walking past you, would she be interested in you? Okay? Now, this is a really important point, because when you start saying, I want better employees, the question I have is, if that better employee showed up at your front door and they looked at your business and they looked at who you are and they looked at where you were going, do they look at you and say, this is the perfect fit for me, this is exactly where I want to work? Because if the answer is no, then you're going to be frustrated for the period of your business career trying to get people that are of high caliber to want to work for you. It starts with the whole idea of strong leadership. Now, when I talk about strong leadership, there's two things that I'll put in there. The first part of strong leadership is passion. And what I mean by that is you need to be passionate about the business you're building, okay? You need to have some sort of emotional drive behind what you do. People need to sense that you're on a mission, okay? So you need to have some passion, and the second part of this one is to have some responsibility. Now, when I mention responsibility here, what I'm saying is, if someone is going to choose to work for your organization, they have to trust you, right? They have to know that this job is going to take them where they want to go, okay? So strong leadership, in my mind, means you need to be passionate about what you do. You need to be clear about, what it is your vision or your mission or your why about your business is, your purpose. And you need to also have a level of responsibility so you're not seen as a maverick that's going to crash and burn the people that you're trying to attract. Does this sort of make sense? Okay. Now, this is fundamentally all about you. Right? It's not about the marketplace. It's not about the industry you're in. It's about you. Are you the person in your industry that everyone says you've got to follow that guy? He knows what he's doing, right? Because until you become attractive, you will not attract that higher caliber person. And this is a simple process. It's really about a bit of soul searching. It's really about understanding your why, right? If you haven't seen Simon Sinek, he has a great TED talk called Starting With Why. Brilliant sort of way to understand how to get your purpose clear. But for me, the soul searching, the understanding about what drives you as a person and why is your business valuable is the first step to finding these people. So this is that sort of attraction factor that we talked about. Now, the second part of this formula, so let's just sort of number these. These are going to go with number 1. So number 2. The second part of this formula, we need to be thinking about something that I call common goals. Now, I'm not going to teach you about goals today, right? That's something that you have to get really good at. And it's not just about having a set of goals, it's about being a goal setter. And what I mean by common goals is goals that apply to not just you, but to everybody who works for you, for everyone who uses your organization. So having an objective, and I'll give you an example. If I had someone in an interview and they said, what's your goal? And I said, to buy a new Porsche, right? They'd be looking at me going, well, that's great. What about me? Okay, that is not a common goal. A common goal to me is something that encompasses everybody within the organization, including the clients, including the suppliers, because the more people that your common goal encompasses, the more likely people will want to actually join you on the journey. So a common goal has a purpose, right? And the purpose is to do 2 things. It does this, it enrolls people, and it inspires people. Okay. Now, what's the difference between vision and goal? Well, pretty simply, a goal is something with a deadline. A goal is something measurable and tangible. And it has to be something that's big enough that people want to be a part of it. So I'll give you some examples you'll all know. Steve Jobs has always been seen as a visionary, right? Now, if anyone's read any of his books, he was not the nicest person in the planet to work for, right? If anything, some people called him an asshole. Now, reality is he was a visionary, right? Steve Jobs had a view of how things should be in the future, right? He had a vision. His vision in his company was to make a ding in the universe or challenge the status quo. So these are big goals that he had that were all encompassing. People wanted to work for him because they said, I want to be part of someone who challenges this, or a business that challenges the status quo. I want to be part of someone who's got such a big vision that my goals and aspirations fit underneath that umbrella. So when we talk about common goals, it's not just about sort of saying, oh, we want to grow by 10% next year. That's not inspiring. That doesn't enroll people. But if you want to be the best in your industry, people will aspire to work with you, right? Because they want to be part of a company that wants to be the best in their industry. So strong leadership and common goals are really about setting the tone, becoming attractive, and making sure that the people who are applying are people who are aspirational. They actually want to grow within the business. Is this making sense for everyone? Just nod if yes. Okay, cool. I just can't. It's hard on the camera. Normally if I'm in a room I can see you guys. Here it's a bit sort of like little boxes. So when we talk about these common goals, I'm not going to go through how to do this, right? Because what you need to do is you need to learn how to build a business plan, right? Now, whether you do it manually, whether you do it with one of our coaches, I don't mind, right? But what I am suggesting is until you can get who you are, what you stand for, and what you aspire to in writing, right? It's just words coming out of your mouth. And remember, you get the people in business you deserve. So if the candidates that you're getting when you go out into the market to recruit are low caliber, don't look at the market, look at your marketing material, right? I'll talk a bit about this because one of the issues that I do see a lot of is people are hesitant to put the name of their company in their ad when they go on Seek, right? So they say, we are a professional cleaning company looking for someone to join our vibrant team. But they don't really tell you anything about the DNA of the organization. My suggestion is if you're going to look for high caliber employees, not only do you spruik your name, you talk about your vision, you talk about your mission, you talk about your passion, your purpose, everything. Because you want to enroll people, right? You don't want people just taking the job for the money. You want people who buy in on who you are and where you're going. And you can do this in any industry. So I'm not going to suggest this only works with people like Apple. This can work with a painting organization. This can work with a cleaning company, right? It can work with any company. You just have to be gutsy enough to take a position to be the best in the field, right? Because if you want to be best in field, then the people who want to work for you will probably see that as aspirational and they'll be more attracted to the organization. Making sense so far? Cool, let's keep moving. Go to number 3. Number 3, what I want to talk about here is quite interesting, right? Because when we talk about strong leadership up here, we're really talking about things like vision. We're talking about things like mission. When we move on to common goals, we are talking about goals. We're talking about things like objectives. We're talking about where the direction of the company is. When we come down to number 3 here, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about rules of the game. Now, when I talk about rules of the game, I have to move over a bit. I'll just push this up. Rules of the game. When we start thinking about what we're trying to get, okay, typically when I look at most people's recruitment methodologies, most of the way that people recruit, they recruit based on skills, okay? And the way they do that is they put an ad in the paper or an ad in Seek and they say, we need a bookkeeper. We need a bookkeeper with at least 5 years experience. They need to know how to use Xero. They need to have track record, and it's all about skills. Now, I'm going to ask a question and you guys can type the answer into the chat box or you can speak. What's more important when recruiting, skills or attitude? Thanks, Alex. Attitude. So most people will agree attitude's more important, but I'll suggest that 80 to 90% of advertisements that are attracting people to your business only talk about skills, right? Because we can measure skills. It's very difficult to measure attitude. So how do we measure attitude? If we're recruiting, if we're going through a process of attracting high caliber people, how do we measure their attitude? Any ideas? It's a tricky one.
Selection of questions in the interview process?
Yes, we can ask questions, but the question is what questions, right? Because most of the questions that we ask in the interview process, the challenge is that they've been asked before and people can actually research the answers. And so the question is, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? You know, what are the strengths that you bring to the organization? And most people who come to interview have researched the answers to these questions. And they'll tell you what you want to hear, right? So be prepared that I'm not suggesting people lie. I'm just suggesting that they will tell you what you want to hear to get the job, okay? So we can ask questions, definitely. But I'll tell you the most important thing on how do you define attitude is you get people to do things. You get people to do things and how they respond to your request will tell you more about the person than how they answer the question. Okay? How you get people to respond. So I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute, but I just want to talk about rules of the game for a little bit more. Because when we talk about rules of the game, what I want to sort of suggest is that there's things called standards. And there's things called norms. Okay? And when we talk about standards, standards are things that we set a bar, right? We set a bar and we say our expectation is that people do these things in a certain way. Okay? Behavioral. They show up to work on time, they show up dressed appropriately, they don't steal things. There's rules, right? And these rules actually allow us to sort of set some sort of guidelines around things. Now, then there's what's called norms. Now, norm is just short for normal. But really what norms are is what's acceptable, rather what is accepted versus what is expected. Does this make sense? What is accepted. So sometimes we say, you will show up, you will do your work, you will complete this volume of work every day, and then you'll go home and you'll leave everything tidy. And they become the standards. But then when people start, we don't manage them to the standards and we allow them to do whatever they do. So we end up accepting less than standard. Does this make sense? And by accepting less than standard, we create new standards. And that standard's called mediocrity in business. Because I think the whole mathematics of employing people is pretty simple. If I employ someone in my business, I am investing money. And when I invest money, I expect to see a return. Now I can do that in writing by saying this is what I expect from all the people that work for me. But then when they show up and they do whatever they like, I compromise my standards and I accept what's called norms. And it usually shows up in these sorts of comments. Can't find good people. You know, this is what you get, you know, in a market like this. So people will justify non-performance, okay? And so when we talk about rules of the game, there's a couple of things that I want to highlight here. The first one is that you need to be very clear on what your expectations are in terms of KPIs for numbers, but also behavioral performance, okay? We call this a culture statement or values within the organization. Culture statement or values. And these sort of things fit in here. And they need to be defined. Now, inevitably, the values of the business, the way that we extract them is I ask the question, what's most important to you about how your business runs? And when you answer that question, you will start to tell me what your priorities are. Now, as we extract those from you as the owner, we need to incorporate those with our vision, our mission, our culture, our goals. And all of this information needs to go into what I would call the DNA of your business, okay? Because now we're telling people who we are, what we stand for, what's important to us, and we're starting to build this profile of not just our product, and we're a bookkeeping company looking for bookkeepers, but of what we stand for and what's important to us. And the more you get this documented, the more likely you are to attract high caliber people, okay? When we do recruitment, one of the things I've learned in recruitment is, especially now, we're about to go into what's called a buyer's market, which means unemployment's at an all-time high, which is awesome, right? Because it just means that if you're looking for people, soon there's going to be more people knocking on your door than you can possibly handle. The real issue is going to be how do you find the good ones, right? Because there's also an undertone of, well, they're only unemployed because they're not great. Because during COVID, a lot of people are sort of clearing the sort of operations and getting rid of what they would consider deadwood. That doesn't mean that they're all deadwood. It just means that people who are smart are saying this is a great opportunity to thin out the herd. But for other people, they're going out of business and they're just dumping everything. Here you are with this sort of phenomenon coming at us, which is unemployment, and I'm a business owner rubbing my hands going, this is great because there's going to be some good people in there. My question is, how do you pick them? Okay? As a business owner, typically we don't have the time. Our preference, and when we coach people, we talk about deselection in recruitment. So we say, let's get a big, bright story about who we are, what we stand for, what we do. Hey, Ainsley, I can see you now. Hey, can't hear you, but I can see you. So we get this big, bright picture of who we are, where we're going, what we stand for, our values, and we use this to attract people. Now, we're going to attract a whole mix of people. We're going to attract high caliber people, we're going to attract low caliber people, and everyone in the middle. How do we deselect? Now, the good news is when you've got lots of choices, then you're probably going to make a better choice. Because I think for most people, when they go into recruitment, they get one or two candidates and they pick the best of two. But sometimes the best of two is the best of a bad bunch, right? So you need to have volume so that you can actually get better selection. Now, how do we deselect? I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I want you to imagine that when we have too many candidates coming at us, and these days the way it occurs is people automatically respond to your ad by just posting their resume. And they say, it's almost automatic. They don't even read the ad, they just send the resume. And here we are with 100 applicants. We go, oh my God, 100 applicants. So the first hurdle that I would put in place is I would put an ad together that says, we are not reading resumes. If you are interested in applying for this job, you need to ring this number. Now, this is ironic, right? Because when we do this with clients and they say, it's funny, we had 50 resumes sent through and we only had 3 voicemails. And I go, well, it's interesting. And I go, what happened to the other 47? Because some of them were really good. I said, they might have been great resumes, but they didn't read your ad. Because in the ad, I make sure that we put, if you do not ring this number, your application will not be considered. Now, this becomes the first hurdle, okay? Because I will suggest that if someone does not follow the instructions in your ad, chances are they're not going to follow the instructions in the job. You following? So we need to think about how do we deselect rather than how do we choose. Because I'm looking for attitudinal things, not just skills. Now, don't worry, skills are important still. But the first thing to me is attitude first, skills second, right? If I'm employing a brain surgeon and you've got a great attitude but no skills, you don't get the job, right? You still have to have the skills, right? But I want the one who's got the skills and the great attitude, not the bad attitude. So we go with attitude first. We do it by creating hurdles. We do it by getting our candidates to jump through hoops and demonstrate what their attitude is like, okay? By having these 3 things, strong leadership, so vision and mission, common goals, so making sure we're clear on our objectives within our business and they're big enough to incorporate other people's goals, including our employees. Then we start talking about values. So how do we expect people to behave within the organisation? We're creating a filtering mechanism. And if we have this filtering mechanism, when we go to recruit, we now have a way of identifying the high caliber people. So far, so good? Nodding, not nodding. Probably a little bit overwhelming for some of you, but we've got 3 more to go. So I want to talk about the next stage, because let's assume that we have a clear picture of who we are, what we stand for, what's important to us. 1, 2, and 3 are done. Right? Now what we need to start talking about is the specifics of the job. Now in this section here, it's very specific. We talk about we need to have an action plan. Now to me, an action plan in a business requires a few things, right? The first thing that it requires is for you to understand what roles you're applying, you're wanting to fill, okay? So we need to have what's called an org chart, organization chart. Now, I won't just say an org chart. I think what you need is what's called a functional org chart. So it's not about the people, it's about the jobs, okay? If you're not sure what this is, get yourself a copy of Michael Gerber's E-Myth book. It's been around for about 30 years now or something. It's an old book. But he talks about the importance of being very definitive about not the people I want, but what is the functions that I expect them to fulfill within the business. So the functional org chart just shows all the different roles and responsibilities within the organisation. Underneath that, we start putting together what's called a series of position contracts. Now, position contracts are interesting, right? Because every single box within this functional org chart, and I don't care if you're a one-man band, there should be anything between 10 and 50 boxes on your org chart. Because as a one-man band, you wear multiple hats. You all know what I mean, right? No one does just one thing in a business because your business would not be sustainable. You need accounts payable, accounts receivable, operations, sales, marketing, blah, blah, blah. So every one of these is a hat. And as we define this in writing, and as we start putting these boxes together, we look at each box as a black box. It has an input and an output. So every single position contract has to have 2 things attached to it. One is called a key result area or a KRA, and the other thing is how do I know you're doing your job, key performance indicators. So key result areas refer to what is the primary function for this box, what is the key result that I expect out of this box, and the key performance indicator is how do I know it's been done. Now sometimes it'll be numbers, sometimes it'll be empty inboxes, but you have to be quite specific here because the more specific I am, the easier it is to tell if someone's doing their job. Everyone following so far? So you can see we're getting into the specifics now. There's 2 more things because really all we've done now is we've talked about telling people what we stand for, telling people what's important to us, and telling people exactly what we expect from them in their role, okay? This just means we have a team. what it doesn't give us is it doesn't give us that ability to synergize, right? So we're going to talk about the fifth one here, right? And the fifth one here is, let me get my colours right. Is we need to actually allow our team to take risks. Now, if you want to get high performance people into your business, part of getting high performance people is they like to actually contribute, right? Now, I want my team to contribute, okay? I want my team to be involved in growth. I want my team to actually synergize and actually help me build my business. Now, that's not going to happen unless I give them permission to do it, okay? Giving them permission to do it means take on some responsibility within the organization, within the boxes that I've given to you. Because when we do this org chart, by the way, with the 20 boxes, when we employ people, they might take 2 or 3 of these things, and that will combine to give them their job description. And so once we've done that, we say, here's what we expect from you. Here's how we know if you're doing a good job. Now I want you to take some risks. But I don't want you to take some risks unless you abide by the first 4 rules, right? You need to make sure that it's within our vision and our mission. You need to make sure that it actually fits within our objectives as an organisation. And you need to make sure that you're within the standards that we expect or the values that we expect and in your job. So we support risk-taking. Now, when we support risk-taking, the most important part about doing this is a thing called, if I can spell it right, Kaizen. It's Japanese, Kaizen. I just want to talk a little bit about Kaizen because some of you might have heard of a guy named Edward Deming. So if you don't know who Edward Deming is, if you go into Japanese history, right, straight after they got bombed by the Americans, after the big nukes over there, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Americans said, we need to help these guys. We've actually decimated their economy, so we're going to send a consultant over. And they sent over this guy called Edward Deming. Edward Deming was sent to Japan to help resolve their problems. Ironically, he is considered one of the 9 turning points in history, this guy. Because when he went to Japan, he created a thing called quality TQM, Total Quality Management. And some of you will have heard of this. And he went over there and he said, and this was, I think this was after World War II, so it was in the 60s. And in the 60s, for those who are that old, you'll remember that most of the Japanese manufacturing was pretty poor. Right? It used to be known as Jap crap, right? And so people from Japan used to have this thing that we produce products, but the quality is poor. So Edward Deming went to Japan and he said, one of the biggest problems you guys have is your quality is terrible of your product. And he suggested to them they create a thing called Total Quality Management, which meant all of the employees of all of the factories would get together on a regular basis and talk about how can we do things better. And so they would always consider how can we improve the performance of what we do? How can we do things better? And he calls it incremental improvement. And he said, you just need to improve by 1% every week and you'll compound the improvements over time. So he encouraged the team members to go into this thing called Kaizen, which was incremental improvement. And so now what we found is that the Japanese quality of manufacture is now considered some of the best in the world. And this wasn't by accident, right? They actually refined their processes to the point now that they're considered one of the highest quality manufacturers in the world. And it was because of this guy, Edward Deming. Now, when we run our own businesses, you can be the leader and you can tell people about quality and you can bang on about how you need things to be of high quality all the time. But until they come on board and until they help you, Alex, did you wave your hand or are you just waving at someone?
He also discovered that high quality went hand in hand with what he called absence of variation.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so what he talked about is he said, you've got to be consistent. And so the trick here is to bring my team on board with this journey, right? And we do this by supporting risk-taking. Over in Japan, and a lot of companies here now have suggestion boxes. And in Japan, they used to do this thing that if you gave a suggestion forward and it improved the productivity or profitability of the business, you actually got rewarded according to the improvement. So they would actually give employees on production line huge bonuses if they improved the production line. And by enrolling their team, by saying, listen, we want to hear what you guys have to say. You're on the coalface. You see what we're doing every single day. If you have ideas that can improve productivity, bring them to the table and we'll reward you. And by doing that, they brought all of the team on board. So this thing about supporting risk-taking in your own business is, how do I now make sure that my team are not just doing their job, but they're also contributing to the growth of the organisation? Now, the last one I just want to add to this list, because there's one more final point here, is that we want to talk about, oops, wrong colour, let's get the colour scheme right, 100% involvement and 100% inclusion. Now, when I say 100% involvement and 100% inclusion, what I mean by this is that you need to actually ask your team members to get involved, all right? Because the difference between inclusion and involvement is, inclusion is up to management. It's up to me to include my team in my growth strategies of my business, right? It's up to the individual to get involved. But we need both, right? There's no point you telling everyone they need to come up with ideas if they think, oh, you know, David's just carrying on about this stuff all the time. You know, it's his business. Of course he's doing that. I need them to jump on board. So the question is, how do I get my people involved? Because if I do get them involved, I start seeing this thing called, if I can spell it, synergy. Now, if you look at the word synergy, it comes from two words, right? It comes from the word synchronized, energy, synergy. And synergy is when my team are actually on board with my vision. They're contributing, I'm facilitating, I'm doing the leadership piece, right? The leadership piece is making sure we're heading in the right direction. It's up to the team to actually come on board and give me the ideas and actually facilitate the growth. Now, you can see we've gone through a fair bit today, and I know it's probably raised more questions than given you answers, but what I've shown you is the methodology that we use when we recruit, right? Because I think one of the things I've realised, and it took me a while to get this, but most of you, anyone who employs people knows this for sure, right? If I look at your P&L, one of the most expensive things you'll ever spend money on in your business is wages. Yeah? It's only if you employ people, right? If you don't, they're not. But here's the funny thing, right? I ask people about their wage bill and they go, oh yeah, we spend a lot of money on wages, you know, da, da, da. If you have a good employee, what's the life expectancy of a good employee? How long do you expect them to stay?
5 years.
5 years? Let's say 5 years, right? These days it's less, but I'd like them to stay forever if they're a good employee. That's my ideal, right? And so I work out, how do I keep them forever? But let's say 5. So if I've got an employee for 5 years and we've got an average wage in Australia, I don't know, around 70,000. So 5 times 70,000 is 350 grand. So when someone knocks on your door applying for a job, you've got to look at it and say, I'm about to invest 350,000, if not more, because maybe they want them for 10 if they're good. So I'm going to invest somewhere between 250,000 and $1 million in this person over the period of their employment with me. Now, if you were going to invest in a house that was $1 million, you would spend a lot of time looking around and identifying which property to invest in, right? But when it comes to recruitment, people say, oh, I can't be bothered with this, can't find good people. I know, I'll get a headhunter. And I'm saying, hang on a second. You're about to invest between 250,000 and $1 million in this person. Do you think it'd be worthwhile coming up with a compelling vision, mission, culture, job description so that these people who come to you are coming to you for the right reasons? Okay? So if you realise the amount of money that you're going to invest in wages, and the other thing is that the return on investment of wages is highly, highly variable. All right? Some people aren't worth the money that you're investing, and it's not their fault. They're only not worth the money you're investing because you've either employed the wrong people or you're not clear on what you expect of them. Okay? It's your fault. We've got to start with, if it's problems exist, they're because of the owner of the business. There's an old Italian saying, a fish stinks from the head down. Right? So my reality is I look at people in business and I think the smart people work out how to employ good people. Right? The smart people work out what's missing in this formula that we've talked about today. The smart people actually realise that there's a process to follow in finding and keeping good people. And if I start creating a process like this, what it allows me to do is it allows me to filter through the people that are coming through. And, you know, there's an old saying, you know, hire slow, fire fast. And what that means is spend all the time building the background, spend all the time understanding what's important to your organisation, and spend all the time making sure you're attracting high caliber people. Fire fast means if they're not doing the job that you specified for them, don't keep them, right? But the typical business owner in Australia does the exact opposite. They wait till the last minute to hire, and they go, oh my God, I'm so busy, I need someone. They'll take whoever shows up because they're desperate, And then what they do is they justify why that person doesn't do their job. And they'll hold them for way too long. There's nothing wrong with letting go of people, right? But you've got to do it under the right premise, right? And the right premise is that I'm doing this for the right reasons. I'm doing it because I want to grow my business, and I'm looking for high caliber people who can join me on the journey. So the clearer you are on this, the better off you are. Is everyone following so far? I'm going to stop talking in a minute. I'm going to open up to questions or comments. Because I think, we've gone through a lot today, and I'd be interested to see what you guys have to say or your thoughts on this. Because today's a bit of an open mic. There's a small enough group of people here that we can go through some of this stuff. So let's start with any questions that people might have. Any comments?
David, I work in an industry which is very labour intensive.
Oh yes.
My materials generally cost anywhere from 11 to 15%, and my overheads are around about 5 to 8%.
Yep.
And so for me to try and make a 20% profit in my business,
yep.
I need my wages to be around about the 65%.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard for me at the moment to, again, I feel like I'm deflecting just after what you just said. Here I am.
That's okay. Yeah.
I've got a current wage percentage of around about 73 to 82, which leaves us almost in a deficit. And you were talking about business owners working for less than legal wages, and me and my wife would throw my hand up.
Yep.
It is hard to understand or to figure out, and usually to invest in someone, it is a good 3-month period before you can realise whether you're nurturing the right out of someone or if you're wasting your time.
Yes.
How do you accelerate that where you are usually finding people who are looking for jobs for a reason? There's a reason why they're looking for a job.
Yep.
And you're right, necessity sometimes overwhelms the process.
Yes. This is a great question. I'm so glad you've been honest about it, because it sort of plagues a lot of people, exactly what you've described. And it is a tough answer, right? Because what I'll suggest to you is that 3 months is a long time, right? Now, I want you to imagine, right? Every time you employ someone, it's like it is an investment, okay? Because you go on face value, they come in, they show you their history, and you look at them and you go, they look like the right kind of guy, girl. We bring them on board. And now, over the next period of time, we're evaluating their performance. Now, there's a little bit of latitude, and we say, it's first couple of weeks, we don't expect them to be productive, so we're going to take some time here. But technically what's happening, it's a bit like an investment property. When you first buy an investment property, usually it's negatively geared, right? What it means is it's going to cost you more to keep it than the money it brings in. And over a period of time, it moves from negative to neutral to positive. Now, that happens for a couple of reasons. The first one is that the market goes up. The second one is that you pay off some of the loan. But the trick is to get the repayments to be less than the rent, right? Because until that period of time, you're in what's called a negative gearing trap, which means I have this investment property, so I'm capital rich, but I'm cash poor, because I have to put all my wages in to keep the thing, right? Now, the same happens with employees. When I put a new employee on board and they're not producing, right, I'm paying more than I'm getting, okay? And I can do it for a period of time, but if I do it for too long, it comes out of my own back pocket, okay? And exactly what you just described. So what happens is I can't not pay my employees because they don't stay. But if I don't pay myself, it's called being a business owner, sweat equity. There's a million different descriptions for what that is. But what it really is you being sort of the first person to lose out in this deal, okay?
Sorry, and just on that point, there's two arguments that get posed to me. Yeah. You pay yourself a wage, or you take yourself a percentage. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, you can't. We try to take a percentage. Yeah. So this is you're talking about the owner's wages. Correct. Yeah. So the idea is simple, right? The idea is to make a profit and take it. But what generally happens is when we have to choose between paying rent, wages, and ourselves, we lose every time, okay? Because we're the owner. And we say, look, you know what? We're investing for the future. And this is why I call it negatively gearing. So the short answer is your objective, when we talked about number 4, I'll just go back to that for a second. When we talked about this action plan,
right? The bit that I didn't add to this is what's called induction, right? If I bring a person on board, my objective as a business is to ramp them up as fast as possible. What I mean is take them from negative geared, which means I'm paying wages, I'm getting no productivity, to neutrally geared, which means I'm getting money back that covers the wages, to positive geared, which means I'm now making a profit. Now, I'll give you some rules of thumb around this, right? My view of the world is simple. There's sort of, the rule of thumb is a rule of three, right? What I mean by that is if I'm going to pay a wage, I need to see 3 times growth in revenue of the company or 3 times growth in profitability to cover the wage. So if I'm paying a painter, right? And what's the hourly rate for painters?
About $32 an hour.
Right, and how much do you charge out?
63.
Okay, so to me, you've already got a problem there because you're paying 32, you're charging 63. It doesn't fit the rule of three. Okay, and I'll explain what I mean. When I pay someone a wage, right, I say I need 3 times multiple. I need 1 multiple to pay them, 1 multiple to pay on what's called on costs. Okay, so this is basically their facilities, the sort of business infrastructure, all the tax and all my obligations, and 1/3 for me. Because if I don't see that, then why am I doing it, right? If there's not a return on my investment, because having a big team of guys and making no money doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah. So how do we sort of get our heads around how do we make this more profitable? Now, the obvious answer is to charge more, but then you've got clients that might not pay. So now what we do is we talk about productivity, right? Because when we talk about hourly rate, there's a bit of a sort of conflict of interest. What I mean by that is a business owner is paid, and I'll just put myself back on the screen. A business owner is paid based on profitability. You become more profitable when your team works faster. An employee gets paid on hours. They make more money by taking longer. Right? So if I want a pay rise, right, typically what I do is I either slow my work down and say there's more work I need to do overtime, Cameron, and then you have to pay me more. Right? If I work faster, I don't get paid more. So because I'm getting paid by the hour, not by the production. And this is where the dilemma exists, right? So what I want you to start considering is how do I get my guys to be performance driven? How do I make it that their pay is covered by productivity rather than just by the number of hours they do? Now, I can't answer that question today for you, but this is the sort of way that I'd be taking this, okay?
That's been something for 3 years I've tried to figure out.
Yep.
Incentives,
yeah,
and and making sure corners aren't cut.
That's right.
To meet requirements of those incentives.
It's a good question, right? So what I think you need to do is you need to keep going down that path because you have to deal with a few things. Number one is risk, because if I'm an employee and you say, well, you're not getting paid unless you're profitable, then I'm not going to work for you. That's one extreme. Because you can just basically sort of give people fixed price jobs and say, I'm going to give you $500 to paint that room. Right? If they do it in 1 hour or 5 hours, makes no difference to you as long as it's done to the quality standard you expect. Right? So you sort of play with that in your head and say, how do I accommodate wages, which is the mandatory requirement by law, and also accommodate incentives, which focus on productivity. Okay? So that's the short answer. The longer answer is this is something that you have to work through. Okay? The secondary part of this question that I would like to answer is this whole idea of how do I move someone from negative gear to positive gear quickly? Okay? Now, the way to do it is to make sure you have an induction program, okay? Now, if you have a job that is repetitive, and I think in your situation there's lots of painters because your stock in trade is labour, yeah? You start to realise that there's a pattern of what people need to demonstrate proficiencies in, and there's a pattern of behaviours that I can sense as I bring them on board. So you can start saying, I have a set of KPIs that you need to meet within your first week, within your second week. And I'll give you the example. I don't know if anyone's ever worked at Mcdonald's. No one likes to admit it, right? McDonald's are the most systemized business on the planet, okay? And one of their philosophies is pretty simple. They say if you work at McDonald's, you get inducted the same way, doesn't matter what job you're looking for. They start off by watching a 2-hour video of Ronald McDonald sweeping the floors, and they talk about the vision, the mission, the culture, the values of the business. The second thing they do is they put you on the floor and they say, for your first week, you will be wiping tables. And they go, great, when am I cooking burgers? No, we're not cooking burgers this week. You're wiping tables and that's it. The training takes an hour. And then they say, now that you've been trained on wiping tables, do it for a week. Now, the reason they do that is they say, I'm not going to overtrain, because some of you might have experienced this. You spend 3 or 4 weeks training someone and they leave. Now, when you train someone and they leave, it's very, very expensive because it's not only your time. You paid them to listen to you speak. You speak, so it's a double cost. And then when they leave, nothing happened. So you never got your return back. So in the McDonald's philosophy, they say, if we train you to clean tables and you're still here after a week, we will teach you how to empty a bin properly. Now, think about what happens, right? Because kids who work at McDonald's will clean the toilets every hour on the hour. Right? These are teenage kids that we can't get to put their clothes in the washing bin at home. Will clean toilets every hour on the hour at McDonald's. Why? Because it's a systematic training, right? And sometimes we need to think about how do we apply that in our business. If you've got people that do the same job, painting, you can have a systematic training regime where you induct people the same way every time. And you can tell very early, usually within a week or two, whether they're going to make it or not. Don't wait 3 months, right? Because waiting 3 months is too expensive. So it's a great example. Thanks, Cameron, for sharing that, because it works for pretty much everyone who's on this call that I can see. You just got to start looking at it as how do I turn them from negative geared to positive geared in the shortest time period possible. And be prepared to let people go if they don't work out, right? Because if you try and make someone do something they don't want to do, it's frustrating for both of you, right? And it usually doesn't end well. So we've got to be quite clear about what I expect people to do, how I train them into it, and how I get them out the other end. Any other? Yeah, someone's sticking their hand up. I can't see your name though. Oh. Yes.
Yeah, David, you mentioned about measuring attitude.
Yes.
Like, that's very important.
Yes.
How do we do that?
Aha. Sorry, I can't catch your name.
Yes, Sanjeev.
Sanjeev. Okay. So I sort of touched on this earlier, but attitude's hard to measure, right? But the way to measure attitude is simple. If I ask you to do something, how you respond to my request will tell me a lot about you, okay? So in recruitment, we ask people to do things. Like when we do recruitment, and we set this up through our recruitment process here, we ask people to do things. And one of them is to ring and leave a voicemail. And we find 90% of applicants don't do that. Now, when they don't do that, I don't have to go any further, because I know that if I ask you to do something and you don't do it before I pay you, when I pay you, you're going to do less, okay? So attitude is shown up on how people respond, right? Not what's in the resume, not what they answer to the standard questions, but how they do things. And we do things like group interviews, right? So we ask people to come to a group interview. And we don't do the group interview just so that we can, do a group interview. We do it to see who shows up on time, who shows up early, who shows up late, what excuses they have, what are they dressed like, what do they communicate with other people. So we're observing their behaviour during the whole thing. And there's an old saying, right? You might want to write this one down. How someone does one thing is how they do everything. How someone does one thing is how they do everything. You come late to an interview, group interview here, it's over, right? I don't care what your excuse is, because on the rule of averages, that's who you are, okay? Now, sometimes it doesn't work, right? Sometimes we're wrong, because sometimes people have legitimate excuses, but I don't have the time to identify these things. So how someone does one thing is how they do everything. Is a very good rule for recruitment. The real issue is that most of us don't have enough good candidates coming to the door. Because if we had 3 or 4 great candidates coming to the door, we could be quite discerning about how we choose. When we have 1 or 2, we choose the best of who we have, right? So we compromise our standards. And that's the real issue. The real issue is that we compromise our standards, or we're terrified of having to interview so many people because we don't have the time, right? So we then say, look, we'll just take the first one that comes along because I don't have the time to interview the other 15. The reality is we just don't have a system to do it. So, when we talk about this, because one of the things, anyone who we coach, who I coach in business, I say, we're going to teach you how to recruit, because the most important thing you will learn in business is finding and keeping good people. So we're going to spend a lot of time on it, because the first person you recruit is always going to be the best you got with that knowledge. The second one will be better, the third one will be better, and as you keep getting good at it, you will find you get higher and higher caliber people. But be prepared to make some mistakes. Be prepared to pay some wages, but be also prepared to have these uncomfortable moments of letting people go if they're not a good fit. So does that answer that, Sanjeev?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, there's a bit more to this, and one of the things I'm going to encourage you guys to do, because we have someone in-house, Simone, who works with us, and she does 2 jobs for us. One of them is our HR department. She actually does our recruitment for us. And the reason we get her to do it is because I've been teaching the same way of recruiting for nearly 20 years, right? It's evolved because in those days you used to use the age, the paper, but now we use Seek, and I still say putting that in the paper just subliminally. But we have methodologies that we use to actually test attitude on the way through. So when we help people recruit, because I look at most people's ads when they go into recruitment and they're flat, right? They're talking about the job. You know, I need an engineer and I need them to have these qualifications and these skills, and it's got nothing about why they should work for you, right? We're using the wrong bait, and so therefore we get the wrong fish, okay? So when Simone works with, I get her to work with clients now, and I say, look, you know what? Help them write their job description, help them write their ad, so they're attracting higher caliber candidates. Now, the good news is that if she does that, you'll start to get applicants. The bad news is you now have to be able to manage the recruitment process. So you have to learn a little bit more about recruitment. And we do this within our coaching programs, but if anyone's interested in having a chat with Simone, our HR manager here, I think I'm going to get Kelly to put a link in because she's got a few time slots available. And so if you've got questions and you're in recruitment mode, or if you're thinking about recruiting in the next 6 months, you need to have a chat with her, okay? Because this window of opportunity with unemployment, even though it sounds terrible, and I don't like to be sounding opportunistic, but I'm a business owner and I'm in survival mode, right? People are looking for work that never normally look for work, which means they're out there, right? We just have to work out how to get them and bring them into the organisation. So please, if you want to have a chat with Simone, click the link. You can just email us if you like to have a chat with her. If I'm coaching you guys, you can talk to me about it because it is really critical and the timing is of the essence right now. You don't want to be doing this when you're in the market and you're desperate. Recruitment should start... Sorry?
Sorry, I think I can share that yes, what you're saying is right because we're just hiring 3 people.
Yes.
And that's what we are finding.
Mm-hmm.
Normally I would have paid extra for the seat once, but there's no point.
No.
I got nearly over 100 applications.
Yeah, wow.
Crazy.
So it is happening, and for some industries more so than others. Trades it hasn't hit yet because the trades are busy, but there's... are you busy at the moment, Cameron? You got a lot of work on?
I've felt no real change over this whole period. I'm in the domestic market, but I am finding that a lot of businesses are letting go of the deadwood.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason why I'm getting applicants, and it's because people are using this situation as a reason to spend on.
Now, I want you to consider this. This sounds a bit controversial, but someone else's dead wood could be your pot of gold.
Another man's trash is another man's treasure.
Yeah. Because sometimes people consider someone a piece of dead wood because they don't have a great recruitment methodology, or they don't have great job descriptions, or they're not a great leader, right? And they go, oh, this guy, he's always telling me how to do my job. I can't stand him anymore. I'm getting rid of him. I just want someone who is subservient, does exactly what I say. And you're saying, no, I want the smart guy. I want the guy who has the ideas. So one man's trash, another man's treasure. I still think that you need to have a filtering mechanism coming in, because getting 100 applicants can be very overwhelming, okay? So having a methodology to do that, and this is the secondary part. Normally we need to get the ad right, so you're getting the people in. Then we have the filter. And the filter is how do we minimize the amount of time the business owner's spending going through these resumes, having interviews, because it makes no sense to spend too much time. What makes sense is to create a system. And then the next part of it is this induction, the first 3 months, which is critical to me. I don't want to wait till the end of probation to decide whether I'm going to keep someone. I want to tell as soon as possible. Because if they ain't going to work out, I want to tell even before they start. Right? Because the minute they're on the payroll, my bias changes. Because all of a sudden I substantiate, I chose this guy because I thought he was going to be awesome, so it must be me. And then I keep them too long. Okay? So have a method that we're doing this all the way through. Now, anyone got some sort of hand raising? Was that you, Matthew? You have a question?
Yeah, it was. The software that the company sells, we actually measure productivity, we measure ROI, and we look at that 3x. I tell my guys, my customers, you want to get 3x. 2.5 is okay, but 3 is what you want. Gold standard is 3.5. Sometimes I hit 4 times, and you go, look after that guy, but I pay him more, do something.
Yeah.
You can't be over there. So I'd be interested in talking to you offline, Cameron, about what we do. We don't actually work in the trades, but it might be an opportunity for me to develop something that would work for you and lots of people like you.
There you go. You got his company right there.
I have.
Mimoka Painting. And you got Wed Trim on the other side.
I'll leave my contact number.
Yeah, awesome. just I think you can message each other privately, so feel free to do that. Look, I'm conscious of time. It's just on 4 o'clock. I'm hoping this has been useful and thought-provoking. For those guys that we are working with, by all means, speak to your coach or speak to whoever you're working with about this. For those who aren't working with us, book a time with Simone. She's not going to charge you to have a conversation, right? If you like what she does, we can offer like small ticket price to help you write things like your job description and get your ad up. That's the starting of the funnel. After that, it's up to you what you want to do. So please take this advantage in the marketplace right now and don't sort of leave it, because within 6 months, I think this window will close. If you're in that recruitment space, get this stuff ready so that you're attracting the right kind of people.
Thanks very much for your time, David.
That's all right. Thanks, guys. Enjoy your afternoon, and I think I'll be speaking to a few guys soon. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
David.
All right. Cheers, guys. Okay. I'm going to check out and leave you guys. There we go.